A penthouse, 37 floors above the glittering arteries of the city, all glass and polished chrome, can feel like the top of the world. But it can also be a cage. For Harrison Caldwell, it was both. At 42, he possessed the kind of wealth that reporters described in breathless, multisyllabic terms. He hadn't inherited it. He'd clawed his way to it, building his tech empire Ethelred logic from a garage startup into a global titan. His life was a testament to brutal hours and a relentless, forward-facing gaze. But now that gaze was fixed on a single document lying on his obsidian desk, a contract for the largest merger in his industry's history. And as his maid, a woman he barely registered most days, polished a nearby window, she uttered 5 words that would shatter his world, sir. "Don't sign that contract." Harrison froze the $500 million pen in his hand, hovering over the signature line, a sudden inexplicable chill seeping into his gilded cage. What followed was a descent into a rabbit hole of deceit, betrayal, and a past he thought long buried. This is the story of how a maid's intuition unraveled a conspiracy that reached the highest echelons of power and forced a millionaire to cancel everything. Harrison Caldwell lived his life in meticulously scheduled blocks. From his 5 a.m. workout with a former Special Forces trainer to his algorithmically optimized sleep cycle, every moment was designed for peak performance. His penthouse apartment, a sterile masterpiece of minimalist design overlooking the sprawling metropolis, was less a home and more a charging station for the man who was its primary occupant. It was a space devoid of personal clutter, save for a single small, silver-framed photograph on his nightstand, of a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, his late mother. The silence of the apartment was usually a welcome respite from the cacophony of the boardroom. But for the past week, the silence had felt different. It was heavier charged with the weight of the document that now commanded the entire space, the Thorne-Caldwell merger agreement. It was more than a contract. It was his magnum opus, the culmination of 2 decades of sleepless nights and sacrificed relationships. Damien Thorne, the CEO of the acquiring firm Vanguard Innovations, was the industry's golden boy, a man with a Colgate smile, a Savile Row suit for every occasion, and a reputation for aggressive yet brilliant expansion. The merger would create a behemoth, a company so powerful it would redefine the technological landscape for a generation. Harrison reread the key clauses for the 10th time, the dense legalese blurring into a meaningless soup. His own lawyers, a team of the sharpest minds money could buy, had vetted every line. They called it ironclad, a masterpiece of corporate law. His board was ecstatic, the market was buzzing with anticipation, and the press had already crowned him the new king of tech. All that was left was his signature. Yet he hesitated. A strange, uncharacteristic anxiety gnawed at the edges of his usually unshakable confidence. He dismissed it as pre-merger jitters, the natural apprehension that comes with surrendering a piece of the empire you built with your own hands. It was in this state of quiet turmoil that Sophia Rossi moved around him, a ghost in his peripheral vision. Sophia was in her late 50s, a widow who had been cleaning his apartment 3 days a week for the past 2 years. She was quiet, efficient, and largely invisible, which was precisely how Harrison preferred his domestic staff. He knew her name, of course, and they exchanged brief, polite greetings, but their interactions rarely went further. She was part of the seamless machinery that kept his life running, like the automated blinds or the smart home system. But Sophia was a watcher. It was a skill she had honed over a lifetime of being underestimated. While she dusted the sterile surfaces and vacuumed the plush, sound-dampening carpets, she observed. She saw the tension in Harrison's shoulders, The way he paced the length of the floor-to-ceiling windows, his jaw clenched. She saw the half-eaten meals left on trays, the untouched glasses of expensive scotch. And she saw the visitors. Damien Thorne had been to the penthouse several times in the final stages of the negotiation. He moved through the space with an unnerving ease, as if he already owned it. He was a man who dripped charisma, his laughter echoing a little too loudly in the acoustically engineered rooms. He clapped Harrison on the back, called him partner, and spoke of their shared future in grand sweeping terms. Harrison, usually reserved and wary of such performative bonhomie, seemed to be swept up in it, his own smile a bit tighter, a bit more forced than usual. Sophia disliked Thorne on sight. It wasn't anything she could articulate, not at first. It was an instinct, a primal flicker of distrust. It was in the way his eyes, a piercing shade of blue, didn't smile with his mouth. They were cold, calculating, constantly assessing the value of everything and everyone they landed on. While he charmed Harrison, Sophia saw his gaze sweep over the expensive art on the walls, linger on the secure server room, tucked away behind a reinforced door, and appraise the view as if it were a future asset on a balance sheet. Her unease solidified during Thorne's last visit, 2 days prior. He had arrived with his right-hand man, a severe-looking individual named Gregory Shaw. Shaw was the opposite of Thorne, quiet, sullen, with a face that seemed permanently etched with disapproval. While Thorne and Harrison sequestered themselves in the study to go over the final details, Shaw had waited in the main living area. He'd wandered restlessly, his fingers brushing against objects with a strange mix of reverence and contempt. Sophia had been in the kitchen preparing a tray of coffee when Shaw took a call. He'd kept his voice low, but the apartment's silence carried his words. "The asset is almost in hand," Shaw had muttered into his phone. "The bird is ready to sing." No, he suspects nothing. He's too blinded by the reflection. A pause. It will be a clean extraction. Cleaner than the last one. The word sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. Asset, bird, extraction. It sounded less like business and more like a predator closing in on its prey. Cleaner than the last one. What last one? The phrases had looped in her mind for 48 hours, each repetition amplifying their sinister undertone. She knew she was just the maid, a nobody. Voicing her concerns would be an unimaginable breach of professional and social boundaries. She could be fired on the spot, dismissed as a foolish, meddling old woman. Harrison Caldwell was a genius, a millionaire surrounded by experts. What could she possibly know that they didn't? And yet the image of that cold, predatory glint in Damien Thorne's eyes, coupled with Gregory Shaw's whispered words, formed a knot of dread in her stomach. She thought of her late husband, a simple, honest mechanic who had been cheated out of his small garage by a slick-talking investor who had promised him the world. She remembered the shame, the helplessness, the way the life had drained out of him in the months that followed. She saw a flicker of that same vulnerability in Harrison, a man who, for all his wealth and power, seemed isolated alone at the top of his glass tower. So on this Thursday afternoon, as the city hummed below and Harrison prepared to sign away a part of himself, Sophia made a choice. She finished polishing the final pane of glass, the reflection showing Harrison's tense, unmoving back. She took a deep, steadying breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She crossed the vast expanse of the living room, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble floor. She stopped a few feet from the desk. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her presence. He was completely lost in the gravity of the moment. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet but clear. He flinched, startled out of his concentration. He turned his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Sophia, what is it?" This was it, the moment of truth. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "Sir, don't sign that contract." The words hung in the air, audacious and utterly unexpected. The silence that followed was profound. Harrison stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. The billionaire and the maid locked in a tableau of silent, sudden confrontation. The pen in his hand, poised to change the world, froze. And in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, Harrison Caldwell felt a crack in the perfect, polished facade of his life. Everything was about to change. Harrison's first reaction was a flash of pure, unadulterated irritation. The spell was broken. The monumental historic moment he had been steeling himself for had been punctured by the most improbable of sources. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dangerously low. The words were a warning, a clear signal to retreat. But Sophia did not retreat. She had crossed the Rubicon, and there was no going back. "I apologize for overstepping, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "But I had to say something. I have a bad feeling about Mr. Thorne." Harrison let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A bad feeling, Sophia. This is a $500 million merger, not an episode of a daytime soap opera. My feelings don't enter into it, and with all due respect, neither do yours." He turned back to the contract, eager to dismiss her and recapture his focus. "It's not just a feeling, sir," she pressed, taking another step forward. Her proximity was a further breach of unspoken protocol. "It's what I've seen, what I've heard." This gave him pause. He swiveled his chair back, around his eyes narrowing. "What have you heard?" Sophia recounted Gregory Shaw's phone call, repeating the chilling phrases as accurately as she could remember them. "The asset is almost in hand. The bird is ready to sing. Cleaner than the last one." As she spoke, Harrison's expression shifted from annoyance to condescending pity. "Sophia, that's corporate jargon. Asset means the company. Bird is ready to sing is a crude way of saying I'm ready to sign. It's tasteless, but it's hardly evidence of a conspiracy." He was explaining it to her, as one would to a child who had misunderstood an adult conversation. "And Mr. Thorne," Sophia continued, undeterred by his dismissiveness, "the way he looks at this apartment, at your things, it's not with respect. It's with hunger. It's the look of a man who doesn't build things, but takes them." Harrison leaned back, steepling his fingers. He felt a headache beginning to form behind his eyes. The whole situation was absurd. His maid, a woman who cleaned his toilets, was offering him unsolicited advice on the most significant business deal of his life based on overheard chatter and amateur psychoanalysis. The logical, data-driven part of his brain screamed at him to have her escorted from the building. But another, quieter part of him hesitated. For 2 years, Sophia had been a model of discretion. She was quiet, hard-working, and utterly professional. For her to risk her job to commit such an egregious act of insubordination, the reason had to be powerful. He looked at her face, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw not foolishness, but genuine, profound concern etched into the lines around her eyes. It was the same look of desperate worry his own mother used to get when he was a boy sick with a fever. "Sophia," he said, his tone softening slightly, "I appreciate your concern, truly. But you have to understand, this deal has been scrutinized by the best legal and financial minds in the country. Men like Damien Thorne don't get to where they are by being common crooks. They're too smart, too visible." "Perhaps their cleverness is the danger, sir," she replied softly. "They hide in plain sight." A memory surfaced in Harrison's mind, unbidden. A dinner with Thorne a month ago, at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Thorne had been telling an amusing, self-deprecating story about one of his early business failures. But Harrison had noticed something odd. Thorne had gotten a small, almost insignificant detail wrong about the timeline of a tech trend from that era, a detail Harrison, who had lived and breathed that world, knew intimately. At the time, he'd dismissed it as a simple memory slip, but now, filtered through Sophia's warning, it seemed different. It felt rehearsed, like a man telling a story that wasn't his own. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of doubt. This was ridiculous. He was letting the ramblings of his maid and a single misremembered anecdote derail a historic merger. Thank you, Sophia. Your loyalty is noted. You may go. It was a firm, final dismissal. Sophia's shoulders slumped. She had failed. She gave a small, defeated nod and turned to leave. As she walked toward the kitchen, her eyes fell upon the sleek, minimalist fireplace in the main living area. It was a decorative ethanol fireplace rarely used. The cleaning protocols were strict. She was to wipe it down every visit. As she knelt to clean the hearth, her hand brushed against something rough in the ash catcher tray. Curious, she reached in. Her fingers closed around a small, brittle piece of paper that had escaped complete combustion. It was a fragment of a memo, the edges charred and blackened. Most of it was unreadable, but a few words typed in a distinctive font she recognized from some of Thorne's documents left on the coffee table were still legible. Rolter Shell Corp. Liquidate remaining assets. Post-transfer. Oldwell IP to be diverted through. Repeat of Atherton precedent. The words meant little to her, but the tone felt damningly familiar, echoing the cold calculus of Shaw's phone call. Liquidate. Divert. She stood up, the charred paper, clutched in her hand like a holy relic. Her mind raced. She couldn't just leave. She couldn't let him sign. Harrison was still at his desk, his pen once again in hand. He was angry at himself for allowing the interruption to affect him so deeply. He was about to finally bring the pen down to the paper when Sophia's voice, now sharp with urgency, cut through the silence again. Sir, I found this. He turned, his patience completely gone. Sophia, I told you. Please, she interrupted, holding out the fragile piece of paper. I found it in the fireplace. I think it belonged to Mr. Thorne's people. With a sigh of profound exasperation, Harrison snatched the paper from her hand. He glanced at the words. Gibraltar Shell Corp. Liquidate remaining assets. Caldwell IP to be diverted. Atherton precedent. For a moment, he just stared. Unlike Sophia, Harrison understood exactly what these fragments implied. Shell corporations, asset stripping, intellectual property diversion. It was the blueprint for a hostile, predatory takeover designed to gut a company from the inside out, leaving nothing but a husk. It was a corporate raider's playbook. And then he saw the last two words. Atherton precedent. The blood drained from Harrison's face, a cold, sickening dread far more potent than any pre-merger jitters washed over him. He felt as if the floor had just fallen away, leaving him in a terrifying freefall. Atherton. William Atherton. He had been a brilliant software developer, a rising star in the early 2000s. Harrison had known him, had admired his work. Atherton's company, Innovate Dynamics, had been acquired by a larger conglomerate in a deal that was hailed as a major success. 6 months later, Innovate Dynamics was bankrupt. Atherton's key patents had been mysteriously transferred to an anonymous offshore entity, and he was left with nothing. The conglomerate that had acquired him, it was a subsidiary of an early venture capital fund, run by a young, ambitious, and utterly ruthless financier, Damien Thorne. The official story was that Atherton's company had been mismanaged post-acquisition. Atherton himself had contested it, screaming fraud, but his claims were dismissed. He lost everything, and according to industry gossip, had faded into obscurity, a broken man. Harrison looked from the charred paper in his hand to Sophia's worried face. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. Thorne's misremembered story, Shaw's phone call, the hunger in Thorne's eyes, and now this, a burnt memo explicitly referencing the Atherton precedent. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a confession. The pen dropped from his hand, clattering onto the obsidian desk. The sound echoed in the cavernous, silent apartment. He looked at Sophia, his billion-dollar legal team, and his ecstatic board of directors forgotten. In that moment, the only person in the world he trusted was the quiet woman who cleaned his home. "Get me Alistair Finch on the phone." Harrison said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Now. Alistair Finch was a relic from a different era of law. At 68, he was semi-retired, preferring the company of his rose bushes and first edition novels to the cut and thrust of corporate litigation. He had been Harrison's first lawyer, the one who had incorporated Ethelred logic in a cramped, dusty office when Harrison was just a hyper-focused kid with a revolutionary idea and no money. Alistair was more than a lawyer. He was a mentor, a friend, and perhaps the only person other than his late mother whom Harrison had ever implicitly trusted. When Alistair's voice came through the speakerphone, calm, cultured, and laced with the gentle rasp of a pipe smoker, Harrison felt a small measure of relief. "Harrison, I thought you'd be popping champagne by now. Don't tell me you've got cold feet." "Alistair, I need you to do something for me." "Off the books." Quietly, Harrison said, his voice tight with urgency. Sophia stood silently by the window, a sentinel guarding the fragile newfound truth. "That sounds ominous," Alistair replied, his tone shifting from jovial to serious. "What's wrong?" Harrison quickly explained the situation, Sophia's warning, the overheard conversation, and the damning contents of the burned memo. He read the fragmented phrases aloud, his own voice, laced with a disbelief that was rapidly hardening into rage. When he got to the words Atherton precedent, there was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Good God," Alistair murmured. "William Atherton. I remember that. A complete crucifixion. I never knew Thorne was behind it." "Neither did I," Harrison admitted, a bitter taste in his mouth. The acquisition was done through a subsidiary with a different name. He buried his involvement deep. "And now he's planning to do the same to you," Alistair concluded grimly. "The charming Damien Thorne. A wolf in sheep's clothing. I need you to dig, Alistair. I need everything you can find on Thorne Gregory Shaw and Vanguard Innovations. I need to know about their other acquisitions. I need to know if there are other Atherton precedents." "Consider it done," Alistair said, all traces of his semi-retired languor gone. The old courtroom warrior in him was awake. "But Harrison, you need to be careful. These are not men to be trifled with. You're in the final stages of the deal. If they get a whisper that you're suspicious, they'll either find a way to discredit you, or they'll accelerate their plans. You have to proceed as if everything is normal." "Normal." Harrison scoffed, glancing at the contract that now looked like a death warrant. "I'm supposed to smile and shake the hand of the man who's planning to gut my life's work." "Yes," Alistair said firmly. "That's exactly what you have to do. Buy us time. Schedule another meeting. Tell them you have some minor questions about tax implications. Something mundane. Stall them. I'll get to work." The call ended, leaving Harrison once again in the heavy silence of the penthouse. He looked at Sophia, who had not moved. Her presence was no longer an intrusion. It was an anchor. "Thank you," he said the words, feeling inadequate. She simply nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Sir Harrison thought for a moment. He was stepping into a war, and he had only two soldiers he could trust, a semi-retired lawyer and his maid. Just Keep your eyes and ears open. You see things that no one else does. Over the next 3 days, Harrison Caldwell gave the performance of his life. He called Damien Thorne his voice, a carefully calibrated mix of bonhomie and diligence. Damien Harrison. Listen, my personal accountant flagged a few minor points on the post-merger tax structuring. It's likely nothing, just some jurisdictional questions, but I'd feel better if we could have a quick sit-down with the finance guys to iron it out. Just dotting the I's, you know. Thorne's response was smooth as silk. Of course, Harrison prudence is what got us where we are. Anything you need. How about Friday? The meeting was set. The trap was holding. Meanwhile, Alistair Finch, working from his book-lined study in the countryside, began to pull at the threads of Damien Thorne's carefully woven empire. He made quiet calls to old contacts, retired journalists, disgruntled, former regulators' lawyers he'd faced in court decades ago. He started with Thorne's publicly listed acquisitions, the ones that were celebrated in the financial press. On the surface, they looked fine. But when he dug into the fine print, into the post-merger corporate filings, a disturbing pattern emerged. He found 3 other companies over the past 15 years that had followed a similar trajectory to Atherton's. The first was a promising biotech firm called Helios Therapeutics. Acquired by a Vanguard subsidiary, its revolutionary cancer research patent was siphoned off to a holding company in the Cayman Islands within a year, while the core company was loaded with debt and driven into bankruptcy. The second was a logistics software company, GeoLink, founded by a woman named Maria Flores. After its acquisition, GeoLink's valuable routing algorithm, the company's crown jewel, was sold for a pittance to another obscure entity, which then licensed it back to other companies for a fortune. GeoLink was shuttered, citing market redundancies. The third was a renewable energy startup, Solara Innovations. It had been acquired, praised, and then quietly dismantled its solar panel efficiency technology, vanishing into the labyrinthine structure of Thorne's corporate network. In every case, the original founders were left with a fraction of what they were promised, bound by ironclad non-disclosure and non-compete agreements that Thorne's lawyers ruthlessly enforced. They were silenced, their reputations tarnished by the failure of their companies. Alistair compiled his findings into a preliminary report, his pipe long forgotten, a grim expression on his face. The pattern was undeniable. Thorne wasn't a builder, he was a demolition expert. He didn't merge, he consumed. He would buy a healthy, innovative company, identify its most valuable intellectual property transfer, that IP to a private shell corporation he controlled, and then let the original company wither and die. Harrison Caldwell wasn't his next partner, he was his next meal. Alistair called Harrison on a secure line. "It's worse than we thought," he said, his voice grave. "He's a serial killer of companies. Ethelred Logic is the crown jewel he's been working towards his whole career. The IP you hold is worth 10 times the merger price on the black market." As Harrison listened, a cold fury settled over him. It was the fury of a creator watching a vandal approach his masterpiece with a sledgehammer. He looked around his pristine apartment, a symbol of everything he had built. He now saw it through Thorne's eyes, not as a home, but as an asset to be liquidated. As if on cue, a floral arrangement arrived at the front desk. It was from Damien Thorne, a massive bouquet of white lilies, funereal and ostentatious. The card read, "To the future partner, can't wait for Friday." D. The scent of the lilies filled the apartment, thick and cloying. To Harrison, it smelled like death. He picked up the vase, and with a sudden violent motion, hurled it against the wall. The crash was deafening. Glass and water exploded across the marble floor. Sophia came running from the kitchen, her eyes wide with alarm. She saw Harrison standing amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving. She saw the shattered vase, the broken lilies lying in a heap like fallen soldiers, and she saw the look on his face, no longer confused or anxious, but filled with the hard, chilling certainty of a man who now knew the name of his enemy. The time for stalling was over. The time for fighting back had begun. The shattered vase was a turning point. The quiet, simmering anger within Harrison had erupted, crystallizing into icy resolve. He was no longer just defending his company. He was seeking justice for the ghosts of Thorne's past victims, for Atherton Flores and the others Alistair had uncovered. But to fight a man like Thorne, he needed more than a pattern of predatory behavior. He needed irrefutable, undeniable proof. He needed a weapon. Alistair Harrison said into the phone, his voice now dangerously calm, as Sophia quietly began to clean up the mess of glass and flowers. Your findings are damning, but they're circumstantial. Thorne's lawyers will tie us up in court for a decade, arguing business practices. We need something they can't spin. We need to get inside his operation. There was a pause on Alistair's end. I know a person, he said hesitantly. She's not a lawyer. She's unconventional, extremely effective, but she operates in the grey areas. If we engage her, there's no turning back. Who is she? Harrison asked. Her name, or the name she uses, is Nix Alistair, explained. She's a cybersecurity expert, a hacker to be blunt, one of the best. She consults for private firms on stress testing their security, but her real talent lies in offensive digital forensics. She finds things that are meant to stay buried. 24 hours later, Harrison was sitting in Alistair's study, the scent of old books and pipe tobacco, a comforting antidote to the sterile air of his penthouse. Nix was not what he had expected. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with streaks of neon pink in her black hair, a series of silver rings on her fingers, and a laptop covered in cryptic stickers. She looked more like a musician or an artist than a high-stakes cyber investigator, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. She listened intently as Harrison and Alistair laid out the situation, her expression unreadable. So this Thorne guy is a corporate vampire, and you want me to find his digital coffin, she summarized when they were finished, her voice a dry monotone. Essentially, Alistair said, you want me to illegally access the private servers of Vanguard Innovations, a multinational corporation, and the personal devices of its CEO and his top associate in order to find evidence of criminal conspiracy, Nix clarified, raising a pierced eyebrow. You know that's like a metric ton of federal crimes, right? We are prepared to compensate you appropriately for your time and the considerable risks involved, Harrison said, sliding a cashier's check across the table. Nix glanced at the check. The amount on it would have allowed her to retire to a private island. She didn't even blink. The money's nice, but I'm not a merc. I have 2 conditions. 1, full autonomy. I do this my way, no questions. 2, if I find what you're looking for, you don't just kill the deal. You burn his empire to the ground. You go to the authorities. You make sure he can't do this to anyone else. I have no time for rich guys settling scores. I'm interested in justice. Harrison looked at Alistair, then back at Nix. You have a deal. Nix gave a curt nod, opened her laptop, and her fingers began to fly across the keyboard with a speed that was mesmerizing. Give me everything you have on Thorne and Shaw. Email addresses, phone numbers, social media profiles, even fake ones. Favorite restaurants, hobbies, pets' names. Any little crack I can use to slip a wedge in. For the next 48 hours, Nix worked relentlessly from a secure room Alistair had prepared. She drank black coffee and ate nothing but protein bars, her face illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors displaying cascading lines of code. She was a digital phantom, slipping through firewalls, ghosting past security protocols, and mapping the vast hidden architecture of Thorne's digital world. While Nix waged her silent war, Harrison returned to his penthouse, the stage for the final act. He needed to prepare for the Friday meeting, but he felt adrift, haunted by the ghosts Alistair had unearthed. He asked Sophia to box up some old company archives he kept in a storage room, a task to keep her busy and close by her calming presence, a silent reassurance. Sophia worked quietly in the storage room, a space filled with dusty boxes of old hard drives, forgotten prototypes, and stacks of photographs from company events over the years. As she sorted through a box labeled Early Days, 1998-2002, she came across a photograph of a company picnic. A much younger Harrison, with more hair and fewer lines on his face, stood with his arm around another young man. They were both grinning, holding up a ridiculous trophy. The other man had a familiar face, but she couldn't place it. It was the severity, the permanent look of disapproval that eventually jogged her memory. It was a younger, happier-looking Gregory Shaw, but that wasn't his name back then. Harrison had mentioned him once in a rare, unguarded moment when speaking of the company's origins. He'd talked about his first partner, the co-developer of their foundational algorithm, a man named Michael Vance. Harrison had told him Michael died tragically years ago. A boating accident in the Caribbean. He'd been alone. The company had been devastated, but Harrison had pushed through, honoring his friend's memory, by building their shared dream into a reality. Sophia stared at the photograph, a cold dread creeping up her spine. The severe, sullen man who had stood in this very apartment, whispering about clean extractions, was Harrison's dead partner. Or rather, he wasn't dead. He had a new name, a new face, hardened by time, and something ugly, and a new boss. Her hands trembling, she took the photograph and walked out to the living area. Harrison was pacing by the window, rehearsing his lines for the meeting with Thorne. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned annoyed at the interruption. "What is it, Sophia?" She held out the photograph. "This man," she said, her finger pointing at the smiling face of Michael Vance. "You said he died. But he was here, with Mr. Thorne. His name is Gregory Shaw now." Harrison took the photograph. He stared at the image of the ghost of his dead friend. The face was younger, fuller, not yet carved with the cynicism of the man he knew as Shaw. But there was no doubt. The eyes were the same. Michael Vance, his partner, his friend, the man whose death he had mourned, was alive, and he was working for the man trying to destroy him. The official story of the boating accident, which he had never had reason to question, suddenly felt paper-thin. A body was never recovered. The boat was found capsized. It was ruled an unfortunate accident. At that exact moment, Harrison's secure phone buzzed. It was a message from Nix. "I'm in. It's a slaughterhouse. He has a dedicated server codenamed Hades, hosted in a non-extradition country. It's where he keeps the records of all his corporate raids, all the IP patent transfers, offshore accounts. I have the kill chain for Helios, Geo, Link, Solara, and Atherton. It's all here. But there's something else. A separate, heavily encrypted folder, labeled MV Succession. Working on it now. Be careful. These people are not just thieves." Harrison read the message, then looked back at the photograph in his hand. MV Succession. Michael Vance. The pieces didn't just click into place. They exploded. The boating accident. Michael's disappearance. His reappearance years later as Gregory Shaw Thorne's Grim Reaper. It wasn't just a hostile takeover. It wasn't just about money. This was something far older and far more personal. The foundation of his entire company, his entire life's work, was built on a lie, a betrayal so profound it stole the air from his lungs. The ghost in the machine was real, and it had a name. The morning of the Friday meeting arrived with a cold, steely grey sky that mirrored the mood inside Harrison's penthouse. The stage was set. Alistair Finch had arrived an hour earlier, his usual gentle demeanour replaced by the focused intensity of a seasoned litigator preparing for a high-stakes cross-examination. Sophia moved silently in the background, ensuring the coffee was fresh. Her presence, a steady, reassuring hum in the charged atmosphere. She had uncovered the original sin, and now she would witness the reckoning. Harrison himself was a study in controlled calm. The shock and rage had been forged overnight into a cold, sharp instrument. He was no longer the prey. He was the hunter, and his gilded cage had become his trap. The doorbell chimed at precisely 10:00 a.m. Harrison smoothed his tie, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Damien Thorne stood there, exuding his signature brand of predatory charm. He was dressed in a flawless navy suit, his smile wide and confident. Beside him, Gregory Shaw looked as grim and impassive as ever, a dark shadow clinging to Thorne's light. "Harrison, good to see you," Thorne boomed, striding into the apartment and clapping Harrison on the shoulder. "Let's hammer out these last few details and get to the celebration." "Damien," Gregory Harrison said, his voice even. "Thanks for coming. You know my personal counsel, Alistair Finch." Thorne's smile tightened for a fraction of a second as he shook Alistair's hand. He wasn't expecting a lawyer at a meeting about minor tax questions. He preferred his prey to be unchaperoned. "Alistair, a pleasure. Always good to have a wise head in the room, though I assure you this is all straightforward." They sat around the large glass table in the dining area, the unsigned contract sitting in the center like a dormant viper. Sophia served coffee, her movements deliberate and silent. As she placed a cup in front of Gregory Shaw, their eyes met for a fleeting second. She saw a flicker of something in his gaze, not recognition, but a deep, soul-crushing weariness. Harrison, following the script he and Alistair had devised, began with the mundane. So Alistair was reviewing the tax liabilities concerning the transfer of our European server assets. He began launching into a deliberately tedious line of questioning about German tax law. For 20 minutes, he and Alistair played their part, weaving a web of bureaucratic nonsense. Thorne grew visibly impatient, tapping his pen on the table, eager to get to the main event. Shaw sat silently, his gaze fixed on the middle distance. Then Harrison pivoted. "You know," he said, his tone shifting from inquisitive to conversational, "this whole process, looking back at the company's history, has made me quite nostalgic. I was even looking at some old photos the other day." He slid a file across the table. It contained several glossy 8x10 prints. The top one was the company picnic photo. This was from our first company picnic, 20 years ago. Thorne glanced at it dismissively. "We all looked younger then, eh?" Harrison's eyes, however, were locked on Gregory Shaw. Shaw's face had gone rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped his coffee cup. He stared at the image of his younger, smiling self. "That's me," Harrison said, pointing. "And that was my first partner, Michael Vance, the co-creator of our core algorithm. Brilliant man." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "We lost him in a boating accident not long after that was taken. A terrible tragedy." He looked directly at Shaw. "You know, it's a funny thing about grief. It plays tricks on your memory. But looking at this photo, I'm struck by the resemblance. Aren't you Gregory?" The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Shaw's composure finally shattered. A tic started in his jaw, and a fine sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. Thorne, sensing the sudden drastic shift in the room's temperature, moved to intervene. "Harrison, what is this? If this is some kind of last-minute negotiation tactic—" "This is not a negotiation," Alistair Finch cut in, his voice like flint. "This is an inquiry. Mr. Shaw, or should I say, Mr. Vance, perhaps you could clarify a few things for us? For instance, how a man who was declared dead in 2002 ends up as the senior vice president of operations for the company that is now trying to acquire his former business." Shaw looked wildly at Thorne, a cornered animal seeking an escape route. But Thorne's charming facade was also beginning to crack his blue eyes, turning to ice. "This is absurd," Thorne snapped. "My colleague's resemblance to your dead partner is a bizarre coincidence, and I find this line of questioning insulting." "Is it a coincidence?" Harrison pushed his voice, dropping to a near whisper. He slid another document across the table. It was a printout from Nix's findings, a bank transfer record, showing a payment of $2 million from a Cayman Islands shell corporation, one owned by Thorne, into an account opened by a Gregory Shaw, just 3 weeks after Michael Vance's death. "This is the first payment. There were others. Was that your price? Michael, $2 million to fake your own death, abandon your life's work, and hand the keys to the kingdom to him." Shaw visibly flinched at the sound of his real name. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a choked sound came out. Thorne stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This meeting is over. Our lawyers will be in contact." "Oh, I doubt it," Alistair said, calmly producing his own phone. "Unless you want to discuss the Atherton precedent, or perhaps Helios Therapeutics, or GeoLink, I've been speaking with their founders. They are very eager to join a class action lawsuit. And a hacker who calls herself Nix has just finished decrypting a server you call Hades. She found the entire playbook, the asset stripping, the IP diversion, everything." Thorne froze, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. Harrison stood up as well, walking around the table until he was standing directly in front of the man he once called partner. "Was it his idea, Michael? Did he approach you? Did he find some weakness, some debt, some secret, and use it to turn you? Or were you just greedy? The fight went out of Shaw, Vance, in an instant." He slumped in his chair, his face pale and clammy. He looked like a man who had been carrying an unbearable weight for 20 years. He knew Vance whispered, his voice raspy. "He knew I had gambling debts. Big ones. He said I'd lose my stake in the company anyway. He said everyone would think I was a failure. So he offered you a way out." Harrison finished for him, his voice laced with contempt. "A new life, a new name, and a pile of money. All you had to do was die." He said the accident had to look real. Vance continued, his voice, cracking the confession tumbling out of him now. He sabotaged the boat's radio. He had another boat waiting a mile offshore. I just had to swim to it. He told me it was the only way. The final ugly truth landed in the silent room. It wasn't just a betrayal. It wasn't just fraud. It was attempted murder. Thorne hadn't just left him to die. He had ensured he couldn't call for help. If Vance hadn't been a strong swimmer, he would have drowned. Thorne lunged for the contract on the table, perhaps in a mad attempt to destroy the last piece of evidence. But Harrison was faster. He snatched it away. "It's over." Damian Harrison said the words, tasting like victory and ashes. He looked past the two men, his gaze landing on Sophia, who stood watching from the doorway of the kitchen. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Harrison turned back to Thorne. "Get out of my home." Thorne stared at Harrison, his mask of civility completely gone. replaced by a look of pure primal hatred. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the apartment. Gregory Shaw, now Michael Vance, once more a ghost made flesh, stumbled after him, a broken man twice over. Harrison stood for a long moment, the unsigned contract in his hand. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he tore it in half, the sound ripping through the silence. The cancellation of the Thorne-Caldwell merger sent an immediate and violent shockwave through the financial world. The official press release from Ethelred Logic was a masterpiece of corporate understatement, citing only that, during final due diligence, insurmountable discrepancies and conflicts of interest were discovered, which made proceeding with the merger untenable. The market, which had bet heavily on the deal, panicked. Vanguard Innovations stock plummeted by 40% in a single day. The financial news channels went into a frenzy, speculating wildly. Was it a disagreement over valuation, a clash of egos? No one guessed the truth. Not yet. For Damien Thorne, it was the beginning of the end. He tried to spin the narrative, releasing his own statement that blamed Harrison's erratic behavior and unrealistic last-minute demands. But the damage was done. The aura of invincibility he had so carefully cultivated for decades was shattered. The whispers started. If a deal this big, this close to the finish line, could collapse so spectacularly, what else was wrong at Vanguard? His investors and board members who had once revered him now looked at him with suspicion. The wolf for the first time smelled his own blood in the water. While the public storm raged, a quieter, more significant storm was brewing behind the scenes. Alistair Finch, armed with Nix's downloaded trove from the Hades server, and Michael Vance's impromptu confession formally contacted the district attorney's office and the SEC. The case he laid out was explosive, alleging not just serial corporate fraud, asset stripping, and market manipulation, but conspiracy and the attempted murder of Michael Vance. The authorities, initially skeptical of such grandiose claims against a titan like Thorne, could not ignore the mountain of digital evidence Nix had provided. A major federal investigation was launched. In the strange, surreal quiet of his penthouse, Harrison felt a profound sense of dislocation. He had won. He had saved his company, but the victory felt hollow. The revelation of Michael's betrayal had fractured the very foundation of his life story. The friend he had mourned, the partner whose memory he thought he was honoring, had been a phantom, a willing accomplice in a plot to destroy him. It was in this period of introspection that his relationship with Sophia Rossi fundamentally changed. She was no longer just the maid. She was the catalyst, the sentinel, the one person whose quiet integrity had pierced through a conspiracy that had fooled everyone else. He found himself seeking out her company, not for cleaning but for conversation. One afternoon, as she was preparing to leave, he stopped her. "Sophia," he said, "what you did. I don't think I've properly expressed how grateful I am. You saved more than just my company. You saved me from a catastrophic mistake." Sophia simply smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "You are a good man, Mr. Caldwell. You build things. Men like Mr. Thorne, they only know how to break them. I did not want to see him break something good." "I've been thinking," Harrison continued, walking over to the vast windows overlooking the city. "My entire adult life has been about data algorithms and logical conclusions. I built my world on what could be quantified and proven. But I missed this. My lawyers, my board, my accountants, all the experts missed this. You saw it. You didn't have data. You had intuition. You saw character. I've been running this entire company without that." He turned to face her. "I want to offer you a new position. Not as my housekeeper. I want you to be my personal advisor, a consultant. I want you to be in the meetings to listen to observe. I want you to be my early warning system, my conscience." Sophia was stunned into silence. Her a consultant, an advisor to a billionaire. The idea was preposterous. "Sir, I don't know anything about business. I am a cleaner." "You know about people," Harrison countered. "That's more important than any spreadsheet. I can hire 1,000 people who can read a balance sheet. I can't hire one other person with your integrity and perception. I'll pay you a salary, of course, a generous one. You'll have an office. But mostly, I just need you to be you." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. For her entire life, she had been invisible, overlooked. To be seen, to be valued for the very qualities the world had always ignored. Her quiet watchfulness, her gut feelings was a validation so profound it left her breathless. After a moment, she nodded. "I would be honored, sir." A new alliance was forged in that moment. The inner circle of Ethelred logic was redrawn. It now consisted of Harrison the visionary, Alistair the wise counsel, and Sophia the moral compass. There was one more member to add. Harrison arranged a meeting with Nix. She arrived at his office, not the penthouse, dressed in her usual attire of black jeans and a band t-shirt, looking entirely out of place in the corporate environment. "Your information was perfect," Harrison told her. The DA said it was the most complete digital indictment they had ever seen. "The case is ironclad," Good Nix said, sipping a can of soda she'd brought with her. "Glad to hear it. Here's my invoice for services rendered." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was for $1. Harrison looked at it, confused. "I don't understand. Our agreement..." "The agreement was that you burn his empire down." Nix said, her expression serious. "You're holding up your end of the bargain. That's my real payment. But I have a new proposal. The check you offered me, before I don't want it, as a one-time payment. I want to use it to create a new independent cybersecurity division within Ethelred, fully funded with me in charge. We'll protect this company, and we'll also do pro bono work. We'll be a shield for the next William Athertons and Maria Floreses out there. We'll hunt the hunters." Harrison stared at the young woman, a genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in weeks. He saw a reflection of his younger self in her, the same drive, the same desire to build something that mattered. He had started his company to create. Thorn had used his to destroy. Nix wanted to protect. "Welcome to the team," Harrison said, extending his hand. Nix shook it firmly. The team was complete. The battle was won, but the war for a new, more just future was just beginning. The fall of Damien Thorn was as swift as it was brutal. Armed with the irrefutable evidence from Nix's Hades server and the powerful testimony from his past victims, the federal case against him was a slam dunk. The trial became a public spectacle, dismantling the myth of the untouchable corporate titan piece by piece. Thorn, stripped of his charm and power, was found guilty on all major counts, from fraud and racketeering to conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, his vast empire collapsing into a sea of lawsuits and regulatory seizures. The wolf was caged for good. Michael Vance, for his pained cooperation, received a 10-year sentence, a ghost finally released from a 2-decade-long haunting. In the wake of the verdict, Harrison Caldwell rebuilt his world. The ordeal had changed him, cracking open his data-driven shell to reveal a deeper wisdom. Ethelred logic was reborn with a new soul, shifting from a mindset of relentless growth to one of ethical innovation and integrity. The Aegis Initiative. Nix's new cybersecurity division became the company's shield and a pro bono guardian for smaller startups, vulnerable to the kinds of predators Thorn had personified. Sophia Rossi, once invisible, was now the company's moral compass. In her new role as Harrison's personal advisor, her quiet presence in meetings became more influential than any loud-mouthed executive. Before any major decision, the final crucial question became, what does Sophia think her intuition, once dismissed, was now the firm's most prized asset? She accepted her new life with the same grace and humility she had always possessed, a testament to her unwavering character. Months later, Harrison and Sophia stood on the penthouse balcony, looking out over the glittering city. The sterile glass box had become a home, warmed by new relationships, built on trust and mutual respect. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" Harrison asked, his voice full of a peace no business deal had ever brought him. Sophia smiled her eyes, reflecting the city lights. "My life was never quiet, sir. It was just unheard." She looked at him, her expression a mixture of warmth and pride. "I'm glad you can hear me now." Harrison nodded. He had saved his company, but Sophia had saved its soul. He had learned that the greatest asset isn't found on a balance sheet, but in the courage of a single voice willing to speak the truth and the wisdom to finally listen. And there you have it, the incredible real-life story of how one woman's intuition and courage saved an empire from a predator hiding in plain sight. It's a powerful reminder that wisdom isn't always found in the boardroom, and that true strength often comes from the quietest corners. These events show us that, in a world full of noise and ambition, the simple act of listening, truly listening, can be the most powerful move of all. If this story moved you, if it made you think, and if you believe in the power of integrity, please help us share it. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true stories that you won't find anywhere else. Your support helps us continue to bring these important narratives to light. Thank you for watching, and always remember to trust your instincts.